Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Severance Season 2, Episode 4, Woe's Hollow. This was directed by Ben Stiller and written by Anna Monick. I have to shout them out because they both do an incredible job this episode. I'm going to share why this episode might be the best episode of Severance to date. But there's a lot going on in it, and it was so cool to see things revealed in this episode, not only about Helly and Helena, but about our any versions of these characters, hinting at things about their outie versions and also about the Kier lore of this all. I want to bring up before I jump into my review what Kier Egan's animatronic, which we actually hear in this episode, but what he said when we first saw him in the Perpetuity Wing in Season 1, at the end of his long quote about the Tempers, and we know the Tempers are woe, frolic, dread, and malice. He says that each man's character is defined by the precise ratio that resides in him of these tempers. He says, I walked into the cave of my own mind, and there I tamed them. So we're seeing a cave in this episode. And when he's talking about the precise ratio that resides in them, it reminds me of what they're doing in MDR and those computers and getting a certain amount of those tempers into a person like we're seeing done to Gemma. And he says, should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage. It is this great consecrated power that I hope to pass on to all of you, my children. So when you think of that narration, it really, to me, is always reminding you of what this show is about in the sense of Kier and what the mission of that part of the lore of Lumen is. And why I bring up Scientology all the time is a lot like Ron L. Hubbard with the fantasy part of the religion, the part of saying what it is and what its bones are at the end of the day that inspires the people. And why I think it's important that you have Helena laughing at some of the stories told in this episode is you're seeing that she's really high up in Lumen, but there's people really high up in Lumen that don't actually take it very seriously, this lore. And it also is a big part of Irv's character, which I'll break down as we get more into the review. But I really think it's fascinating watching this episode because I feel like it's our first example of them working really on going through Kier's footsteps and working through one of the tempers, which is woe. And that we're going to see the other three at some point. But there's a goal here where it seems like really making everybody like these Egan clones. Now we start in this episode, shockingly, just outside, right? And it's on Irv's face, and we hear the elevator bell ring, so we know it's his innie, and he's on this big sheet of ice, and he's this little dot. Now, you could think, is this really outside? I don't think it is, and a couple reasons why I don't think it's outside is because Irv did not freeze to death overnight when he goes through this later on in the episode. Also, when we see the TV in this episode, you just wonder, how is that thing plugged in just on a cliff? Also, how are they going to get these versions of their twin selves out there? So this clearly to me is just some area where it's a big area they designed for going through that map they showed to Woe's Hollow in honor of Kier, or it's them visually seeing this programmed into their chip and they're somewhere else that's not as dramatic. But they do touch a lot of the things, so maybe that's not the case. So I think it's more of this was just a complicated design and a part of maybe even Lumen's building they walk through. I also think it's interesting that when you see Mark on the cliff, it's very reminiscent of the painting of Kier and at saying to drink from his water, and he's on the cliff. And we see that's the opening menu screen on the video they're going to see of Milchek. And why I think it's important too is even in that painting, you have 4 bodies of water. So if you think of the tempers always in the show and you have 4 workers in MDR, it's a big theme in the show and representing those things. So I just think, like it goes with the bodies of water, this is one of those areas which is woe they're going through. What I also loved about the start of this episode is the minute Irv just sees Helly, he's suspicious of her. He's like, where did you come from? She's like, I don't know. What are we doing out here? And Irv just immediately gives back a suspicious look. I also thought it was great. They got a lot of good Dylan humor here, especially his reaction to the outside. He's like, I knew there was no actual ceiling, but this is insane, because you sometimes forget you're dealing with innies and things they're seeing for the first time if this really is the outdoors. Now, where it gets creepy and eerie, and no doubt about it, this is the most horrifying episode of Severance to date. But we get this older TV playing a VHS of Milchek. I thought this felt a lot like the Dharma Initiative videos in Lost, mixed with the eeriness of a Max Headroom video and how they cut his head moving. And he calls it an outdoor retreat team building experience. Now, I think Reddit's going to go crazy with that because if you look at the initials, calling it an ORTBO, you take those words around, it is robot. I think that's more of not hinting that, like, oh, these people are robots or using robots. I think it's more of like the idea of like making these people robots of Kier Egan, because he is this perfect man in their eyes. So they are for the next 2 days to walk the Dieter Egan National Forest, and this is where Dylan's like, who the F is Dieter Egan? And they edited this great because they made it seem like Milchick was reacting through that screen. He's like, Dieter Egan, some of you may be quietly yearning to learn more. So we learn about the fourth appendix, and this was dictated in Kier's final hours of his life. It is a text of such sanctity as forbidden on severed floor. It's waiting for them in the scissor cave. It's the same grotto Kier tamed the four tempers for the very first time. So I do think it's interesting that they call it the scissor cave. I think that's just representing the procedure of severance, and that's why that's such a big thing. It's like your moment of getting severed is that moment for Kier where he's changing his life and taming these four tempers and had this awakening. Now we get insane Twin Peaks vibes when they have these shots that are from further away of seeing this twin version first of Mark and just pointing the way they should go. Very eerie. I think these might just be holograms that they're using. And you see that Mark's like, Milchick said there'd be help along the way. And Irv says, I wouldn't trust a word out of that mountebank's mouth, not even televisually. Just really good writing there. You love these kind of remarks that they do in the type of speaking they do in this show. Now, they find the appendix in the cave with a light on it, again, making me think this is all indoors. But we see that Kier dedicated this book to Dieter. And then we learned Dieter was a twin, that's why they're seeing their reflections. But Dieter wanted him and Kier to live in the woods as poor people. And he talks about how he felt his love for his twin unbalanced his judgment on this, and he went along with it. Then they go to Woe's Hollow. So you're seeing that woe being sorrow is Kier learning to then suppress this feeling to become this more ideal person. And that we're seeing Irv in this episode do the opposite of that, which is the right thing, right? It's anti-Kier, where he's following these feelings that are in him. They're naturally of feeling sorrow for the real Helly are and what might be happening if they're getting screwed here by a different person, and that he still follows that and goes through with that. But I love when Irv is reading the text. It is blended with the creepy animatronic Kier voice. Really love it. And you see now Irv is watching closely Mark talking to Helly. And like I said, they do a good job bringing the Dylan humor in, but you see Dylan's already gassed from walking so much. But Irv says to Mark, what were you talking to Helly about? I don't trust her. She's lying about her outie. So they did a good job, too, of not knowing how much Irv really was suspicious of here. That, okay, there's the surface level that maybe this is still Helly R, and that she's just lying about who she really is out there. But you see there's way more to his suspicions. And if you weren't thinking that this was Helena, clearly it's going in that direction. But he says to Mark, it's clear you don't have an objective perspective for her because of your feelings for her. And I thought that was a good reflection of what Kier was talking about how he didn't have an objective perspective of his brother and why he followed along with him through the woods. Now, another thing, just pointing it out that makes me think this is indoors too, is it never actually snows. The snow you're seeing falling is from the wind on the trees, but they find this dead, rotted seal. Now, Helena looks generally disturbed by this. She's like, why does it look so messed up? So it also seems like something she wasn't familiar with that'd even be here. But Irving thinks they should eat it. He is on such high alert, doesn't even know if they will be fed. This is going to get huge payoff, this seal moment in the conversation with Irv and Helly, which we'll get to. But I think that's going to make Reddit go crazy about what the deal is with that seal. It's going to be like the new goat. Now, we get to the hollow. You see this waterfall that Milchick claims is the biggest waterfall in the world. So I doubt if it was outside and it was the biggest waterfall in the world that somehow Lumen, even though they have a lot of money, would be able to get that as private, sacred grounds. But they see four twins looking down at them. And I love Milchick appearing in this white outfit. It's so funny looking. And it's also weird when they look at the twins again, it looks like Helly's neck is bent. So I don't know what the subconscious message is of that. And it's alluding to her when she hanged herself in the elevator. And it reminded me of the Bent Neck Lady episode of Haunting of Hill House. If you haven't watched that show, that episode is incredible. But we see that they have the blue tents for the color of MDR. And they have these electric torches, I'm sure, so no one can get any ideas of burning down the place or having a danger if something happened if they were just using regular old torches. They can control it a little more. And Helly's reaction, just saying like, wow. Like Helena being like, you guys really went all out with this, huh? But Helly makes Irv a snow seal. And Irv says it felt alarmist and probably irrational, suggesting they eat the seal. Now I think the seal is representing Helena, and that he is alarmist this whole episode, really also about Helly being something that she's saying she's not, and that he will eat that seal, which is Helena, by the end of this episode. And you see, he says, what did you really see during the OTC? And the way Britt Lauer does Helena here is great, because she goes, Irving, and then the death look she gives him is like the most Helena she's shown in this area. Now, where the humor of this had me dead, and how they do this so well in Severance, from going from like sci-fi to mystery to a lot of emotional weight, but then just laughing moments, is when Miss Wong is playing the Theramune. That like was perfect to have that in this show. It had me dead. And it also had me dead that when Milchick's reading the narration of the story from the appendix, she's making it go darker and darker, the Theramune, as the story gets darker and darker. And I also want to point out with Milchick's reading of by the campfire, not only this scene, but in the final scene, which we'll get to, this is just so showing you that Tremella Tillman deserves an Emmy. And it's a crazy story because this cast is stacked. They're all amazing. But the unknown name coming into the show, Tremella Tillman, still to me is giving the performance, even out acting all of them, which blows me away. Really, really cool. I think he's going to be a superstar. But I also like they have these perfectly cut squares of marshmallow with Kier's face on them, very in the Severance tone. And I love some of the writing in the story, like the brothers told each other rhyming jokes till our gullets ached. Those rhyming jokes totally would have made Irv laugh. But the brother did not want to go back to the father, even when Kier suggested it, and then his eye popped out when he was crying. He pulled his hair and he had this bleeding scalp, so his hair gets all twisted, and basically his brother is dying in front of him. And then he walked away from his brother, Kier, and went to the waterfall to drown out his brother's cries. And Dylan's like, that's actually really smart. Now, this is where he first encountered the Temper Woe, which was really creepy, the photo, and that's how you plant and make sense of Irv having in his nightmare later on, where he get that image of Woe and why it would be accurate. And it's pretty funny, he's getting a nightmare from an image in a book. And Woe told Kier, this is your doing, you suffered his wantonness, now he is no one's brother, only chaos's whore. And then Milchick says, the end, like right after. So good. And then he says the next chapter is Kier and the Thieving Nanny. I wish we got to hear that one. I hope we eventually hear it. But Helena laughs at Milchick saying every word is truth in the book to Irv. This is where I feel like Helena really screwed up. I know Irv says he caught her tell by her being too cruel, but this was huge too, because I think this is where Helena got so cocky that she could just come down here and do what she wants and not break the illusion of this Kier Egan fable, we could say, because there's no way a lot of this actually happened. And her laughing at that confirms that, and how her Audi doesn't really take the lore of Kier seriously, and her being someone who is born into it would make sense that, yeah, she didn't as an adult choose to buy into all this, so she's probably just in it for the power it gives her. But also that Irv is the one who always bought into the writings and really took them seriously, and then he had a complicated relationship with it, but it seemed like the fear it was putting into him was starting to suck him back in a little bit here, and that's why Milchick says it's all truth, and Helena being the one laughing about it is what's going to bite her in the butt eventually, because it gets Irv off of that. Now, Milchick punishes them and destroys the marshmallows, and he says marshmallows are for team players, Dylan. They don't just hand them out. I think this was a little dig actually at Helena, and it's the same way Coble did it too, that she's someone they view as that gets handouts, you know, and that she's not going along with the plan here, and she's making Milchick's job way harder. Now, I love when things heat up, no pun intended, but you see Irv tells Mark to stop making goo-goo eyes at Helly. Now, what's brilliant about the cinematography in this moment is they set up the torch in the background to have the flame coming out of Irving's head. This is the Irving we see that's burned this place to the ground, Irving in claymation, so you know where this is going. But I love that kind of visual storytelling. And he brings up the night gardener, and he asks her if he had a flashlight, which was great. He says to Mark, which was really out of line, using your pupils to make love to her while your Audi's wife rots away somewhere, which is such a weird thing to think about too, is like, how much should an innie really care about his Audi's life? You know, it's something you think about. And Helena's like, it's okay. We all know Irving's upset because he can't ever see Bird again, and he's really lonely. Now, this might not seem as bad, really, as what Irving just said to Mark, but it's actually worse because of where it's coming from. It's coming from someone who actually knows the situation they're in, where at least what Irving said is coming from someone who is a victim in the situation, where Helena knows the truth of the situation right now, and she's still saying something so cruel. And it's interesting with this character of Helena and the hints we've got her that, like, she's not totally this black and white, like, villain character, because we've seen the way she watched the video of Helly kissing Mark, that she definitely clamors for what she doesn't have in her life, some kind of intimacy, but she says, sorry I'm distracting you from looking for your wife. I do think for a moment she kind of hesitates at how far this can go and how is this ethical to possibly have sex with this guy and he doesn't know who you really are. But him saying, you've already helped me so much, and she says, I have, gives her in her head the like, okay. But she did for a moment think about it, so I'll give her that. But they get it on, and this is insane because, we could have a situation where Helena gets pregnant with Mark's innie, and this is just going to make things so complicated because this wasn't Helly R. Now, how is Mark going to react to this? And there's an interesting line where Helena says to Mark, I didn't like who I was on the outside. I was ashamed. And you'd think she's saying this to cover her, but I think there is some truth to that too for Helena, that there is some shame in who she is as a person deep, deep down. I don't think this is something that's like going to totally switch in Helena in the outside world, but it's hinting that there's something there. And like I said in a previous review, that's going to be what gets Helena to eventually probably help them, is if she can somehow find a connection with any Mark and that he can understand anything from her, even though she just totally lied to him. He says, I don't care who you are on the outside, I care who you are with me. And it's crazy because he kisses her, and then his reintegration, which I forgot about at one point in this episode because I'm so hooked to everything else, but it kicks in. So I'm glad they showed that happening, so it didn't feel like wait, he's reintegrated, why isn't he having those side effects? But kicks in here, and his sexual experience of his outie kicks in, seeing his wife, Gemma. So it's going to be interesting more and more how much the reintegration affects Mark in these situations. Now, while this is all happening, Bert is in the woods looking for Milchick and Wong. He falls, the torch goes out, and I love when he's lying on the ground, when he's falling asleep, the clouds start to put the lights of the moon out, foreshadowing that we're going to put the lights out of any Bert. And we get an any nightmare, which you always wonder, how does this work? And when you have an any nightmare, how much of it is some experiences of the outie. Really, really cool they went this route. And I like it shows in the beginning of Nightmare, Bert is in his work attire, and it's also Twin Peak vibes and visuals where you're seeing this office desk in the woods, because Twin Peaks always do that, where they put things you see in a normal day and put them into nature-like environments, and you see these flies around his desk. That really symbolizes to me the flies you'd see around a dead body, and just symbolizing this is going to be the death of any Bert. And he's working on Montauk, where we know that Mark was working on Cold Harbor, but he's only 3% done in his nightmare. I don't know how accurate it is to what he's really done, but we know that Irving has admitted that he's slacking at his job because he keeps thinking about Bert and he's doing those drawings. And it's absolutely terrifying when you see Woe in the corner on the computer. And what I thought was interesting is when he looks at the scary numbers, only later you see, as it comes clear, that all the letters in there spell Egan. And I think it's just showing you that all this is leading to them becoming an Egan-type clone. And there's this nice little jump scare here, too. I think that's the first of the show, but very, very scary. Now, Helena goes to look at the waterfall, and she's confronted by Irving. It felt like she was having a moment of clarity here, that she experienced something she never experienced maybe in her outie life, and has a new way of thinking a little bit about these innies, but things are gonna hit the fan now. And Irv says, what you said to me last night, it was cruel. Helly was never cruel. I love that line. And he says, who would have the power to send their outie to the severed floor? She knows at the moment she's caught, and she says, I'm sorry. So again, I think she has a little regret here, just a little. And I love this scene when he has Helly or Helena on the rocks, is dunking her. Everyone thought in the trailer her being dunked was going to be the pineapple bobbing, but no, it's way more darker than that. And I love him shouting, turn her back, Mr. Milchick. She's an outie. And I love when she says, God damn it, Seth, do it. And she reveals who she is in that moment. And him saying, yes, do it, Seth. John Turturro is so good here. And Milchick goes, remove the Glasgow block now. And what's crazy about that is Dylan saw the different override commands on the computer when he found the OTC one, and one was Glasgow. And people were theorizing, oh, that relates to a coma scale. So this being called a Glasgow block now, it's something they can do, I guess, with a switch if it's in the overrides, to make it that when they go into an area where it should trigger them becoming their innie, it keeps them as their outie. And Helena becomes our Helly, and that's confirmed with the elevator ding. And you're like, wait a minute. So this is crazy because imagine being Helly R, coming from screaming on stage the truth what happens in the severed floor, then getting tackled, and then waking up to a horrible situation like this. And why I think Jamel Tillman is incredible is then he shows us him doing his military commander Milchick. And I'm so happy they did this so they don't make it like our group just keeps getting away with everything without punishment. This was oh my God, it keeps that suspense for the rest of the season. Because no, if you guys start to do something, or even in this moment, to scare them enough not to defend Irving to Milchick, this power he reminds them of was amazing. And he's shouting all these things of getting ready to shut down Irv, and this beautiful moment with Dylan saying, Irv, I'm sorry, I should have listened. And I love John Turturro's response as Irv here, saying, it's okay, it's all okay. Just remember, hang in there. And he's talking about Dylan's big heroic moment that we saw in the poster that said hang in there in the break room when he's holding the switches. And I love Irv gets to stare Milchick right in the eyes, and you see that Milchick says walk into the forest, and it's like you see in so many shows and movies where someone's going to walk and they're going to shoot him in the back of the head, but this is the Severance version of just shutting their innie down. And Irv gets to smile at all of them before he turns his head. There's like a hope he's connecting with them. And this was a win for him. Like he was right. And there's this incredible Milchick narration playing while you're seeing these amazing facial acting of our cast, saying things like, your files will be purged and destroyed. It will be as if you, Irving B., never even existed. Had tears in my eyes at that moment. Just beautiful. So I'm going to give this episode a 10. I think this was the best episode of Severance to date, up there with the finale of last season, or even the penultimate episode of last season. Oh, they're all so good. But this was, I think, the best because it had the emotional weight to it as well. That was just not even touched yet in this show, and it hit that. So you're like, wow, I'm like upset over an any version of someone. Really, really beautiful and amazing acting all around. And it had everything you love about Severance, the mystery, the lore, the eeriness, and added the horror aspect. It stepped it up in that, which was cool to see. So it makes you wonder where they're going to go next with that. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it also makes me wonder too, watching this episode about Audi Irving, and we're learning more about him. So it's not the end of John Turturro, which is good. They've left themselves room, obviously, to do stuff with his Audi, who's clearly on to loom in a bit. So I wonder if he is a detective, his Audi, because he's so good, even when he was getting on Helena here and what she was up to. So really fascinating. I'm excited to see what's going to go on with Audi. So it's not like all doom and gloom where you're like, oh, they're killing a great character. It's like, well, we're still going to get John Turturro as Audi Irving, who's going to be very important, clearly. So let me know what you thought of this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment, try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of Severance, and I'll be doing White Lotus as well. And I'll see you next time.